People, I'm very, very sorry for from New Zealand across the other side of the world, and maybe that's some of the issue. Anyway, over the last 20 years, I've worked with hundreds of managers trying to develop their leadership skills. It seems to me that so much has been written about leadership that many people simply become confused about the whole topic. There are too many things to focus on, and it sort of becomes like a blur. In my experience, the whole thing can be simplified down to thinking of it like 3 eyes. Leaders need an eye that looks in, an eye that looks out, and an eye that looks in between. My name is Bruce Holland, and I think I might have lost the screen there. My name is Bruce Holland, and I'm the founder of Virtual Group Business Consultants. I'm talking to you today from New Zealand, which is a small country of 5 million people, probably on the other side of the world from most of you. Over here to the west is Australia, and on to Asia, and away over further on the east side we have South America. New Zealand's known for Ed Hillary, who was the first to get on top of the earth. It's known for bungee jumping, which is the first place where we learned to jump off the world. It's home of Middle Earth, The Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and so those of you who have seen those films will have some idea of the sort of scenery and so on. New Zealand's not the richest country in the world, it's somewhere about the middle, but it is at the moment the best place in terms of the Social Progress Index. So let's get on to the subject, the eye that looks in. And yet it's probably the least developed, because you see, inside is where the power is. Managers need to know who they are, and why they exist and what makes them special. If they aren't strong on the inside, there's simply no way they can be strong on the outside. As your strength grows, as you start to learn who you are, or as managers start to learn who they are on the inside, there's no way that can't help but be communicated on the outside. People become attracted to that power, and so it's really, really important that we start to spend some solid time thinking about who we are as leaders. I'd like to tell you a story. 400 years ago, a group of Thai monks hid this golden Buddha, the one that's on my screen now, from marauding tribes who were coming across the border from Burma into Thailand. And these Thai Buddhists decided to cover their golden Buddha with mud, so that the people, the raiders coming across wouldn't steal their golden Buddha. Soon after they'd covered it with mud, the Burmese attacked and they killed everybody in the area. And for the next 400 years, everyone thought that golden Buddha was a clay Buddha. It was a very beautiful clay Buddha, but it was nevertheless a clay Buddha. Until recently, I mean just after the Second World War, after the Japanese had damaged the temple, they got a crane in to lift the clay Buddha up, and the mud fell off. The mud cracked off it. And so I think that's just a beautiful analogy of leadership, of people in a way, because inside us, I know from having worked with hundreds of managers, that we all have a golden Buddha. We cover it with mud because we say we're not good enough. We flick mud at ourselves. We can't do this, I'm not good enough, and so on. And also the people we trust most, like our parents, and our teachers and our leaders, they flick mud at us too by telling us that we can't do it or that we're not good enough. So I think the eye that looks within has a solid job to do about trying to break off the mud that is covering this golden Buddha or this wonderful power that we have inside us. So what is this mud? It's mostly shame, guilt, and fear. I think shame is worse than guilt. You know, guilt says, why did I make such a silly mistake? Whereas shame says, why am I such a silly mistake? Fear is the most common sort of mud, though. It's rampant in most of our organisations and in a society, at least in my society, and I suspect it's pretty universal. Fear destroys more value in most organisations than any other emotion because it's so rampant, so common, and it takes many forms, but the two big ones are fear of failure and fear of change. The understanding the fear is at the basis of it is a fear of losing love, acceptance, and respect. Yet, you know, when you think about it, fear is the internal motivation of many managers. Managers who play the blame game. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't do this sort of thing. Or shout, or put other people down in public, or who exhibit excessive controls. These are the people who simply have to be control freaks. Judging and criticising provoke defensiveness and withdrawal rather than creativity and productivity. You know, and fear is contagious. We can almost smell it when we're in the room where we've got some fear in the room. When I walk into a room and there's fear in the room, you can smell it. Insects smell pheromones, and I believe people can smell fear-mones. The mud can really take away your power entirely. So what do I mean by the greatness? The greatness inside. The greatness inside, or your golden Buddha, really depends on two things. It's about understanding your purpose and your genius factor. To understand your genius let's start with the purpose. Understanding your purpose is in part about finding the seed that is inside you that somehow or other knows. You know, if you have a plant understands in some way from the seed what it will eventually be. It somehow or other knows what it will someday be. And human beings have within them that same sense of purpose, a knowledge of what they're intended to be. It may not necessarily be clearly defined, and when people are angry, greedy, or self-interested, it's often because of an unconscious sense that their seed is unable to show, to grow, to be allowed to be themselves. The other part is understanding your genius. And I know from having worked with hundreds of managers that we all have a genius factor. Most people have no idea what it is. Occasionally they might sort of trip over it and succeed way beyond their expectations. But then they forget about it because it happens so infrequently, and it happens, it doesn't happen very often, and they can't predict when it's going to happen. So they sort of forget about it. They might think, well, that's strange, but then they forget about it till next time it happens to pop up. So the trick is to identify your genius and use it more often and more deliberately. This graph is a graph of a normal 20-day working week. And down here that we've got a red piece, which is where we typically will use our weaknesses. And oops, sorry, get back. So our weaknesses might give a 1 unit of work. And typically we'll also use our strengths on a regular basis, and they might give 3 days, 3 units of work. And then every so often, but only very infrequently, we might trip over our genius, which gives us 10 units of work. And so the trick is to try and change it from being an ad hoc, unexpected tripping over sort of thing to something more like this, where we more often and more deliberately use our genius factor. And I hope you can see how the units of work just multiply up by multiples if we can do that. So here we are now using our weaknesses, but not very often. We're using our strengths on a regular basis, and we're also using our genius on quite a powerful regular basis. One of the best ways I've found of trying to identify your genius, or at least to get started, is something called Herman's Brain Dominance Instrument. And if you look that up on the net, you'll see loads and loads of references to it. But Herman has created this representation of your brain. On the left-hand side, that's the blue and the green side, is the left brain. And you probably know about the left brain. It's known for its ability to take in the world using its 5 senses. And over here on the right side of the brain, the yellow and the red side, it's known for more for the 6th sense, the intuition. And so but Herman has made this model where we've also got the top of the brain, or the cerebral part of the brain, and you probably recognize that as the part where, if you're looking at the brain, it's the wrinkly white bit that you can see. And there's also a bottom part of the brain, or an inner part of the brain, called the limbic system. And the limbic system actually is an older part of the brain, but an extraordinarily powerful part of the brain, where and it also goes right through into your body. So what we have, if you like, is the blue people. And Herman would say that we all have the ability to think with all parts of our brain, but most of us prefer one or other of these colours. So we have blue type of people who are mostly blue. I mean, they're everything, as I've just said, but they're mostly blue. And these are logical, analytical, fact-based and quantitative sort of people, like lawyers and doctors and mathematicians and statisticians and engineers. Those sort of people who are great with logic and following a process through and thinking it through and coming to a logical conclusion. Then we have green people who are much more organized and sequential and planned and detailed. These people need to be on time, they need to be controlled, and they need order in their lives. They tend to be people like project managers and computer programmers and librarians and administrators and bureaucrats and people like that. They're using their body, and they feel the need to be in order and in control. Over here, the red people are what we call the right brain feelers, or the right brain inner parts. They are the interpersonal feelings, kinesthetic and emotional brains, thinkers. So they are people like nurses who understand people. They are caregivers. They are also, but they're also people like salespeople who can read people and sell them whatever the people say, snow to Eskimos and so on. And then we have the right brain thinkers who think with that cortex part, or the cerebral part of their brain, but in a very different way from these blue people. The yellow people tend to be much more messy, and I can say this because I'm a strong yellow person myself. They tend to be much more messy. They get information from all over the place, and they process that in ways that they don't understand, and certainly the left brain people don't understand. They process this And then suddenly, often in the middle of the night, it will all sort of click into place, and intuitively they know how the answer, but they don't know how they got there. So Herman says that that we all have this sort of thinking, and we can all use all sorts, but most of us have a preference for it, and almost certainly your genius factor will be associated with the sort of colour that you think. So I hope as I'm talking to you, you're starting to get an indication or an understanding of where your thinking comes from. If you're a blue person, you're probably very logical. If you're a yellow person, you're probably very intuitive and integrating and strategic. These yellow people, I forgot to say, they tend to be people like entrepreneurs, artists, architects, people like that who can see the whole, often before anyone else sees the whole. They know the answer, but they often don't know quite how they've got the answer. So not only you as an individual have a colour preference, but, and you can see here that this person, SB on my screen, is a big yellow thinker, whereas over here, MA is a big red thinker. Now, in this team, probably SB and MA, before they understood Herman, were likely to be, and you can't see me, but I'm banging my fists together. They'd be clashing with each other on a regular basis, because their understanding of the world, the way they like to communicate, the way they like to do things is so totally different from each other that there's very little understanding there. The same thing goes for, you know, NH here, who's quite a large yellow thinker, and SB, who's a big, so diagonally opposite people badly misunderstand each other. But you see, when they understand Herman, SB will be told that his best strategy for personal development is to become much stronger at blue thinking, because if he puts the same amount of effort into his blueness as he did, say, putting into, you can see, if you can probably just see that he's very weak in red, this guy, this SB guy. If he put the same amount of effort into trying to become strong in the red, he might become a tiny bit less weak, but if he put that amount of effort into his blueness, he could become like literally world class at that sort of thinking. So Herman says, grow your strengths, become more of who you are. Don't try and hide who you are. That's a stupid strategy. But try and understand your genius and become more of it. Use it more often and more deliberately. And but there's a big proviso with this. SB simply must team up with someone who's strong where he's weak. Someone like this MA. So if SB and MA get together, then they've got power which is almost unstoppable. As leaders need to understand their thinking so that they can team up with someone, where they're not strong, and really put effort into the areas where they are strong. I hope I'm communicating here. In simple terms, blue people are great with the IQ, you know, the intelligence quotient. Green people, probably we could think of them as PQ, or physically quotient. They're good at doing things and getting things done. They're quite practical sort of people. The red people are the EQ people, the emotional quotient people. And they really understand personal beliefs and teamwork and values and how to get the best out of people. And then you've got SQ, the spiritual people, who have a depth of, and they understand meaning and why they're here, and they have a deep need to make a difference. So Herman is a wonderful tool to start understanding and help your eye that looks in to start understanding who I am as a person, so I can be the most of it. I can try and do that more regularly and more often. Grow who I am so it can shine through and into the world, and let my genius come through. But I think it needs to go deeper than that. And the eye that looks within, I often use the Russian doll, the 3 dolls, to demonstrate. Because I think we all have 3 dolls. In my case, the outer doll is Bruce. He's a successful business person. He's a valued advisor. He's a respected professional, but Bruce can also be quite surface. He can be bossy, shallow, unsure, better at finding fault and divisions between people than finding what's good in people. But Bruce is probably what most business people at least used to see. It's the outside part, and it's where he's probably spent most of his life doing his work. The inner doll, the middle doll, is what I call Pelusi. Now, Pelusi's creative. He's surprisingly artistic. There's a funny side. It's intuitive. Pelusi is caring and loving. And Pelusi has an internal age closer to 6 than 60. Those of you who see my photograph realise I'm an old guy. I'm in my 60s. But inside Pelusi is this 6-year-old kid who is still really keen to have a lot of ideas come through and to have some fun. And Pelusi is what my family and friends see regularly, and increasingly as I've developed this eye that looks within, it's what my customers and my colleagues are seeing. Even deeper than Pelusi, though, is my inner doll. And I like to think of that as my soul or my godlike quality. And I'm sure we all have this godlike quality. You know, sometimes when I'm in touch with this inner doll, I can do things that really surprise me. It's almost as though I'm singing with the gods. And other times I can be quite shallow. And I think that's when Bruce is really starting to show through. So this doll, this inner doll, understands that we're all deeply connected to each other, much more connected than most of us understand, and he's starting to show himself, as I say, with surprisingly powerful results. So just to summarize, this eye that looks within, in many ways it's the most important for leaders to develop, and yet usually, in my experience, it's the weakest eye. To be more successful, you don't have to change who you are, you need to become more of who you are. If managers aren't strong on the inside, there's simply no way they can be strong on the outside. And as that inner strength grows, others can't help but see it, to notice it and be attracted to it. And mostly it's about developing your understanding of your purpose and your genius. So that's really the eye that looks within. And I think, as I say, it's the most important. So now let's look at the eye that looks out. In some ways, with most leaders, in my experience, this is the most developed eye. Most managers are in touch with their external world. That's what they've been trained, at least in New Zealand, is what we're trained to do. You know, and it's where we spend our time. We scan our organisations and the environment for opportunities and threats. We study our competitors and our customers for change to take advantage of that. Yet even this eye has a very limited focus. It's quite good at analysing and breaking things apart, but it's much less good at seeing and synthesizing and seeing the patterns in the bigger systems. Excuse me. Also, in my experience, managers' worldview is well out of date compared with what scientists tell us how the world really works. It's based on mechanics more than organics. So what do I mean by mechanics? Managers tend to think of their organisation like a mechanical system or a clock or a machine, and you can tell that just by the words they're using, like, you know, runs like clockwork, downsize, reorganise, cut back, restructure. These are very mechanical sorts of words. And mechanical systems and ways of thinking work pretty well in a predictable environment with simple problems, but they're not nearly so good in our current complex world where we have these wicked problems that we have to solve. And for that sort of thing, we actually need to start thinking more about the organics. Mechanical systems are not self-sustaining, but living systems are self-sustaining. Mechanical systems are designed from the top down, whereas organic emerge from the bottom up. Mechanical systems work for complicated issues, and organic systems work for these complex issues where there simply often isn't really an answer. And so managers who look out need to understand this more organic sort of a way, because it's the way that science tells us the world is. So what does science say? It says that whenever we move from one steady state to another steady state, we go through a period of chaos. And that right at the point of the start of that chaos is the sweet spot of life. So if you were to look at any living cell in your body, it's neither a liquid nor a solid. It's delicately poised between order and disorder. It's neither one nor the other. It's right at that point. And in a way, that's a beautiful analogy for how our organizations need to be created. Delicately poised between order and disorder. The scientists tell us that more control leads to less order, and less control leads to more order. And the other thing that's really interesting about the sweet spot, or this at this chaotic point, is that the butterfly effect reigns. And small changes can lead to way bigger, disproportionately large, system-wide changes. It's a very interesting place, this sweet spot. Yet in hierarchies, we try and push it all up and become too ordered. A great deal of energy is wasted trying to over-control with rules and procedures, too much management, hierarchy, control and limitations. And when that doesn't work, and it won't because it can't, often managers take all the controls away and it becomes too disorganized, and we get this like mob rule. And again, far too much energy is wasted fighting each other over trying to protect ourselves from each other against the dangers of the mob. Now, if only we knew it and we were able to trust the system and let the system work towards its sweet spot or fall into its sweet spot, then organizations will naturally find that sweet spot. It's a balance between order and disorder, and it will occur unless the systems are overmanaged. You've probably seen photographs or even experienced fish swimming in schools, and there can be thousands of these fish, hundreds of thousands sometimes, and they move around up and down, swirl up and down and around, almost as though they are a single body, as though they were a body in their own right, and the individual fish were just cells in the body. Now, birds do the same sort of thing, and you can see here a flock of birds, and something has obviously just charged through it, probably a hawk or something, and split the thing into two. But it will come back and re-emerge into its single body again, and it will up and down and flow around, and so we've got this wonderful in life. At the sweet spot of life, we get this wonderful process called emergence, where from very simple things, big complex bodies can emerge. Emergence is the name given to how simple things can come together and organize themselves into enormously complex systems. They include brain cells, the internet, the economy, the ecosystem, and as I say here, fish and birds and all sorts of natural things in nature. Emergence shows how small can be as powerful as big, where order is not imposed but emerges from the grassroots. Examples of that where emergence in organisation has occurred is Wikipedia. You know, where Wikipedia has become powerful enough to essentially take over Britannica, where Linux is giving Microsoft a really good run for its money, and where Firefox is starting to compete really powerfully with Explorer. So the scientists about 22 years ago, when we were starting to launch Virtual Group, a group of scientists came together into the Institute of Santa Fe in New Mexico to study how this emergence and this how small things can come to create this amazingly powerful patterns. And they found that these scientists came together from many different disciplines: biology, physics, economics, mathematicians, and all sorts of other disciplines, because people were finding it all over the place, this pattern, and they called the science complexity. There was a particular guy who was called Craig Reynolds, and at the time when we were launching Virtual, we got really interested in him because Craig Reynolds put 50 dots onto his computer, and they were to represent the fish, and he tried to get these 50 dots on his computer screen to swim in a way that sort of represented how fish in the sea might swim. And even though he had Cray computers, which at the time were the very best and most powerful computers in the world, he had Nobel Prize winners at his disposal, he found that trying to do it in a top-down way didn't work. So first of all, he made a relationship between every dot and every other dot. And when one dot moved, it changed the relationship with every other dot. And then another one moved, and it changed it again. And after no more than about 7 or 8 moves, the whole thing clammed up with complexity. It simply couldn't do it, despite the Cray computers and so on. The whole system was just too complex. So what Craig Reynolds did was really interesting. Into each dot, he programmed 3 simple rules. And these rules were keep moving, so the dots on this computer had to keep moving at all times. They had to stay close to a neighbor, and they weren't allowed to bump into anything. And when he did this, amazingly, the whole thing started to swim like the fish do. Now, I've done that many times in workshop experiments with maybe 200 or 300 people in a large room with some obstacles in the road. And you ask them to follow the keep moving, stay close, don't bump, and you see them, it's as though you were looking at this fish school. They emerge in these most incredible types of patterns, and so from that experiment in Virtual, we started to think, well, you know, the way most managers assume business to be is that big fish eat small fish, but actually with emergence and an understanding of emergence, it's possible that small fish can come together and take on the big fish. As I said, Linux is doing this. Wikipedia, thousands of individual people not being paid, contributing their ideas into Wikipedia, has essentially destroyed Britannica. Firefox is doing the same sort of thing with their open source. This is a powerful, powerful way of thinking about the world. In the eye that looks outside, most managers are not seeing a great deal of power in this. They're still very much into how can I grow my thing with its big solid walls and power and so on. How can I become the next Microsoft, rather than how can I understand the world as it actually is and try and become something more like Visa. I mean, Visa is a wonderful example. This isn't a dream. It's happening right now. Visa, W.L. Gore, Alcohol Anonymous, Wikipedia, Semco, Morningstar, the Tomato People, Netflix. These are all run by taking the power of people right at the grassroots and making it the driving force for the whole organisation. And so in Virtual Group, back in 1992 when we launched it 22 years ago, we actually launched it in this pinstripe tent. And the pinstripe tent was a symbol of canvas thin overheads, pinstripe quality and total mobility. But it was also to demonstrate a very different way of working. We launched this with television cameras quite provocatively in front of our major competitor in this tower block here. And that was the traditional way of doing it. That was the Microsoft way. And this here, this here was the Firefox way. So Virtual Group became, and still is, this symbol, this model of wisdom without walls. It's about taking away the unnecessary rules and boundaries and so on. And if you do, then you get this unbounded human energy, which, if you allow the sweet spot to emerge, can be almost unbelievably powerful. In Virtual Group, we actually have 4 rules. We have one about keep moving, which is all about keep trying things, keep innovating, exploring, and what works, go with it and ratchet it up. If it doesn't work, move out of it quickly. Stay close means stay close to each other and stay close to our customers. Don't compete, don't bump means don't compete, either inside or outside. I'm totally convinced that cooperation, collaboration is a far more powerful part of nature than is competition. And then leave assent is all about the feedback loop. It's about learning, it's about understanding what works and what doesn't work, and it's about evolving and keeping on improving all the time. It's that whole thing. Now, with those 4 rules, and everybody grabs them straight away and remembers them, and there's no, you know, most organisations I go and they have 30 or 40 different value statements, or maybe not that many, but at least 10. We have these 4. Keep moving, stay close, don't bump, leave assent. And it's an incredibly powerful way of doing it. So just to summarise the eye that looks out, in many ways that eye is the most developed. Yet even this eye has very limited focus. Most managers' worldview is out of date and it's based on mechanics more than organics, and therefore decisions that they make are based on out-of-date reality of how the world actually works. And when that happens, of course their decisions can't be as effective as if they're based on the world as it actually works. So let's go to our last eye, the eye that looks between. You know, scientists are at least 50 years ahead of where most business are in this eye. It's about, they understand that we are much, much more connected than most business people think. Way back in the 1930s, we got the science of entanglement was put forward. Bell's theorem of wholeness and implicit order. Carl Jung talked about collective unconscious. David Bohm and Albert Einstein were very powerful figures in this understanding how we are connected and how things are connected much more than most people think they are. David Bohm showed that if you, and this is getting a bit deep and maybe it's not necessary to understand it, but if you take an atomic particle and you break the two into 2 elements and you put one particle on one side of the universe and another on the other side of the universe, so they're so far away they couldn't possibly communicate, and you change the spin of one of those on one side of then the spin on the other one will like instantaneously change also. Now that sounds really, really spooky, but it shows how unbroken the universe actually is. And this quote from David Bohm says, the most important thing going forward is to break the boundaries between people so we can operate as a single intelligence. David Bohm said that in 1980. Einstein, you know, we know Einstein, and most people respect him for his relativity theory and all that stuff. But he was right into this too. And a quote from him says, the human experiences himself and his thoughts as feelings, as something separate from the rest. And so Einstein was right there. Now, most people when they're looking, most managers when they're looking at their organizations see the people. They see Bruce and Peter. But you know what they don't see is the space between, and that's really, really powerful because that isn't an empty space. It's full of stuff: communications, emotion, energy, love, synergy, information. Managers need to simply understand this stuff and work at that level, because that's where real power is going to come. We tend to think of our organizations like a tree, and this wee guy here, Josh, doesn't look very powerful or important in the tree. But when you start to put it into an informal network diagram, you can see Josh is right at the heart of this whole thing. He is the central person because he's the person that people go to for information. He's the person people trust. And we need, as managers, to see this in between so that we can start to see what's really happening in our organization, not what we sometimes think it is. So now let's just summarize. We have a vast ocean of untapped wealth that's in human energy in organizations that most people are simply not tapping into, most leaders are not tapping into. It's a really big opportunity because that's where the power of your organization is, and because very few people are doing it. And I think it's actually not only the most important thing for your organization, but it's the most important thing for making the whole world a better place. This is deep and powerful stuff, and if you can tap into it, you've got an unbelievable power. So the 3 I's. When I went to university and studied leadership, I was taught about planning and organizing and staffing and directing and controlling. The 3 I's is a totally different way about thinking about leadership. It's about looking within, it's about looking outside, and it's all about looking between. And I hope in some funny way I've tried to show you how this different way is a more realistic, more scientific, more established way of doing it than the traditional way, and probably the way most MBAs are taught. In Virtual Group, we've developed a program to try and liberate the human spirit at work, to try and get people, managers, thinking about these 3 I's. And we have a series of, we do it as a series of half-day modules spread over about a 3-month period. So module 1 and 2 might be 2 half-days to start it off. 2 weeks later, module 3, 2 weeks later, module 4, 2 weeks later, module 5, and so on. In between times, people are doing a whole lot of practice in that time in between. So it's like, even though they're spending very little time in the classroom, they are getting an enormous amount of experience and the time needed to change their habits. We support the whole thing with reading before the module, because then we can use the time when they're together in the workshop to be very interactive, to listen, to get them talking about their experience and so on. And so the whole thing becomes very interactive and a great way of actually trying to do it. So the first few modules might be around the eye that looks within. You know, we probably have a module on Herman, maybe one on the power of the subconscious mind, on one on making the most of your genius, and another one perhaps around confidence, influence, and personal power. It all depends really on the diagnostics that we've done of the organisation to see what's really needed. But then later on in the program, we'll have a change to the eye that looks out, and we'll probably do something around strategy and systems thinking, and then probably end up with the eye that looks inwards, looks between, where we get into cooperation, collaboration, connection, and networks. So really that's the end of my presentation. I'm sorry I've probably gone over time because we started so late, and it was a bit of a nightmare at the start. I don't know whether we've got time for questions or not.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Holland, and I'm also glad that we were able to connect and finally your presentation was delivered. Now we can take a couple of quick questions. Folks, if you have any questions, you can either put it in the question box or you can raise your hand. If you raise your hand, I will give you an opportunity to speak to Mr. Holland. I see there are a couple of hands already raised. So let me go straight to the first caller. We have Mr. Karthik Sundaram. Mr. Karthik Sundaram, could you hear? I believe you have muted yourself. I've just unmuted your microphone, so you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask a question. Karthik Sundaram, I have to mute you back, I believe. Let me move to the question box. Let's see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, let me move to another caller. We have Mark Stora. Mr. Mark Stora, you've raised your hand, sir. Could you please ask the question and introduce yourself first? Mr. Mark Stora, can you hear us? Okay, I believe he's also on the mute. Let me go to another caller. We have Mr. Basim Alvarid. Brother Basim Alvarid, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question, sir?
Yes, this is Basim Alvarid from Red Sea Housing, Chief Strategy Officer. Thanks, Mr. Holland. Seems to me from the name, instead of New Zealand, you should be in Holland. But that's another point. My question is about the peripheral vision. Looking out.
Sorry about the
peripheral vision.
Yes.
Looking in the periphery. Still, managers, when they look out, they still look at the focus area. Now, you mentioned they don't see the space in between, but they also don't look at, when I say they, I mean we are not trained well. When you drive a car from practice, you kind of sense what's going on around you even without looking. But running a business, we tend to fail to see a lot of what's going on the sides, not only the space between the people in front of us. Yeah, if you can comment on that, please.
Yes. Yes, that's a very good observation. I think it's very, very appropriate.
Okay, so that was just, I believe, a comment, and that didn't require any detailed answer. Mr. Holland?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I agree entirely with the question, with the comment.
Okay.
There's absolutely no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt that what you focus on is what you will end up achieving. And therefore, if we're not focusing on what's inside, what's outside in the right way, and what's in between, then there's no way we're going to be able to achieve the power that those three focuses will provide us. And so the comment was right on. If we don't focus on when we're driving, where we're going, we're not going to get there very far, are we? So.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Basim Alvarid, for your comment. And let me move to the next question we have from the question box from Brother Moeed Al-Dahmim. The question is, how the three eyes measured performance?
Measured?
Yeah, how the three eyes.
What's the question?
How the three eyes measure the performance, gauge the performance.
I'm not quite sure on the question. I'm sorry. Are they? gauged.
Yeah, how the 3 I's, okay, it says measure, which is evaluate the performance. How the 3 I's evaluate the performance. Rephrase it.
Oh, okay. Well, again, I think the comment is a very good comment, because if we're not measuring and not gauging how successful we are at this, then we're unlikely to achieve it. And so, along with many things in the organisation, measurement and the way we, the things we start to recognise need to be re-examined and thought about. So instead of just measuring profit or the hard things, we start to have to think much more about what they call the soft things, even though these are often, they might be soft, but they're not easy to measure. But it's more around thinking about the relationships of between people. And you start measuring, you know, who actually is the person, who is the person who is important in the network, like that Josh person was on that chart. If we don't measure some of the stuff, then there's simply no way we're going to be able to make advances in this. But I think all these things, if you're starting to, when you're starting to think about measurement, it's probably not the things that I was trained as an accountant, so I know how people measure things. And we were trained about the balance sheet, you know, the things that we're supposed to measure and to recognise things that are in the balance sheet, like fixed assets. Now, fixed assets are a tiny proportion of the value of most organisations these days. The things that really matter are the people and the relationships, and it's what's in between. And if we don't start measuring how powerful they are, then we're unlikely to actually make much progress. So measurement is very critical in the way we need to start thinking about it as leaders.
Well, that really brings us. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Mr. Bruce Holland, I really would like to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE, for giving this presentation. And I understand we had some technical glitches in the beginning, but we're glad that we overcame, and finally we were able to deliver this webinar and equally moderated it as well. So any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Just to thank the people who did stay with me. I've still no idea what went wrong, but at the worst time, sometimes this sort of thing happens, doesn't it? And I just want to thank you for being patient with me and staying with me, and that I hope we contributed something. Just remember, instead of all that stuff that I've got. A bookshelf of leadership material behind me, and the most important thing really in my experience of over 25 years of leadership development is if we can only get people to focus on the 3 I's, the I that looks within, the I that looks without, and the I that looks between, we've got most of what's required. And I think part of leadership is about trying to simplify it down into something really simple, like 3 things that we can focus on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. A lot of you have been asking about the link from where you can download the soft copy of the presentation. Mr. Holland will be sending us this presentation, the updated presentation, and we shall upload it on community.mile.org. Hopefully within the next 24 hours, it will be available on the MILE community for you to download. With that note, I would like to conclude, and so you all will be automatically dismissed out. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.